So welcome everybody, and thanks for the introduction, Nikki. So whenever you are starting a new network or working on a large scale project, it is really, really important to set up a sensible organizational structure from the very beginning. Networks and large projects never just involve one person. There's always lots of different team members who need to be able to access project files, or at least some people need to be able to do that. And so having a comprehensive, easy to follow structure means that different members of the team can locate the documents they need and ensures consistency with regards to storing documents and data, as everybody actually generally needs to access the same thing and use the same system. So today we're going to talk to you about the 10 steps you need to take when setting up your network or project, or your 10 steps to nailing your organisation, the theme of our event. And if you follow these, you should be able to run a really well-oiled machine, hopefully. So step 1, it is really important to set up a joint shared area where everyone can access your documents. So one practical way to do this is potentially using Microsoft Teams. So this enables all of the different Microsoft documents and apps relating to your network or project to be stored in one place, including lots of other types of files such as forms, images, videos, etc. Your other options could be Dropbox or Google Docs, but before making a decision, we advise checking with your manager or your institution about what cloud-based content managers they recommend, or in some cases mandate, as a lot of universities don't actually allow the use of Google Drive or Dropbox anymore. And also discuss with your team about which tools they're most comfortable using and have experience with. But it's also worth noting you don't necessarily want to give everybody access to everything. So generally I find the core team should have access to everything. And then there should be sub-locations or sub-teams for connected groups or subgroups, such as maybe your advisory board if you're running a network, or if you're working on a big project with lots of different work packages, then those could be set up and you could have separate teams or folders within teams for each of those. And then you want your higher level management to be able to see all of those locations.
The next important step is actually establishing the communications. So you may think, oh, I'm just here to think about organising my projects. And you would be right, that's what we're here to talk about, but you won't be able to manage your data or indeed your projects effectively unless you have established those key methods of communication. So now there are a whole raft of different tools that you can actually use for your communication systems, like there are for storing your documents. And this decision should ideally be made alongside which file location you are going to be using. So if you're going to be using Microsoft Teams for your storage, then you might also decide that you'd like everything in the same place. And then you can also utilize the different channels and chat options that they integrate into their system. Alternatively, you might wish to have a separate channel for communicating about the project compared to storing the documents. So this might be setting up a Slack or a Google chat, or maybe utilizing platforms outside of it, such as Messenger or WhatsApp. Personally, we recommend against using platforms such as Facebook, unless this is something that's actually used across your whole sort of business or organization. But the important thing is that you choose ideally a single platform that people are happy to use, and set everybody up on it as soon as possible. And then that means that if you have queries about your data, the documents, tasks you're doing, that there's always a way of communicating with everybody on the team. And hopefully you can avoid all sorts of different crossed wires when it comes to communicating again about your project.
So step 3 is organising your files and your folders, which Nikki and I are both very fond of doing. So there will be several team members who will need to access the network files. And so having this comprehensive, easy to follow structure means that the different team members can easily locate the documents they need, and also ensures consistency with regards to storing different types of files. So this probably sounds really simple and you're like, why are you even telling me this? But how often do you end up in a situation where you need to find something in a Teams or a shared folder that somebody else set up and can't? Or that somebody else comes to you and says, where on earth have you put this? I can't find it. If you can all get together and agree at the start what things should be called, and you'll stand yourselves in really good stead for this. It's also potentially worth even creating a small document that lists the types of files that go in each folder for a key. So I've done this before for working groups where I'm basically maintaining the teams, but everybody else needs to go and find lots of different bits and different documents and papers that we're working on. And that was really, really helpful. And it can also be really useful to use naming conventions. So you always refer to the same types of files with the same types of names, like always call your agenda an agenda, and always have it in the same type of folder that's called agenda or called organisation, rather than having agenda in one place and schedule in another and program in another, just because it removes confusion and ensures consistency.
This leads us nicely on to step 4. So where you're going to be creating folders which are the same types of documents all the time, for example, when you're creating things around events, it can be really useful to create a template folder with template documents inside it, so that each time you create a new event, it has the same structure that you can then follow. This would also work well for work packages or sub-projects that all have to produce the same style of reports. So on this slide, we have an example from the AI3SD network event folder template. So this was originally set up for face-to-face events, and then this has been evolved to contain aspects for virtual events. We have a big overall template folder, and then we can copy and use the relevant subfolders that apply to that event. If you create folder structures and agree them among the team, this means that all the documents can be well structured and everybody always knows whether they can find the relevant files. We'll cover some of the things about creating template documents. We'll touch on that in our next presentation later on.
So if you're running a funding call or organising any sort of sub-projects such as work packages, and we highly recommend step 5, which is it can be really useful to assign reference codes so that each project or application has its own code. So the screenshot on the right hand side is one of our AI3SD folders, and this is the folder that holds all of the applications from our first funding call. So when we run this, each application is processed, it's assigned its own reference number, and then all communication, all documentation, everything pertaining to that specific application can be tracked using that reference number, including actually going on the contracts, how we refer to it throughout the reports, everything. So then you always know what's being referred to. We don't even rename things after certain people have actually been given funding to ensure that sort of consistency across the board. And you can use a really similar principle for work packages or sub-projects. It just means that things are properly organised and lots of the same types of documents about different things can be filed in the same place and in the right place.
So for step 6, alongside having good document storage, you also need good task management in order to have your project work successfully. This is something that we really stress. Being organised and communicating is a large part of the battle in any project. Similarly to having files in places where everyone can access, all of the organisation and sort of to-do and tasks list also need to be in places that everyone can access and agree on how they are managed. You'll have it a lot where people will send tasks via email or just agree them at the end of the meetings, or maybe not agree them at the end of a meeting. This doesn't really work, and it's a perfect excuse or sort of reason why things will get forgotten about. So we recommend using a task management tool and then creating small manageable tasks that are clearly assigned to team members, ideally with deadlines on when they want to be completed. Then you can have regular meetings to sort of discuss these and update on them. So the examples on the slide show Microsoft Teams on the top and Trello on the bottom. In general, the features across these systems and other systems are fairly similar. So you can create task lists and assign tasks to a single person or to multiple people if they're working on it together. And then you can also break these up into sort of sub lists for a more complex task. You can make different boards or lists for projects and sub projects, and then you can provide updates as the task progresses. The key thing with implementing a to-do list like system is making sure that this is kept updated, so people know which tasks have been done and which still need doing.
So now step 7, which is something I think often gets forgotten and isn't actually planned out at the beginning of a project, is discussing how to organise shared email mailboxes. So it's really common among projects and networks to have at least one sort of generic email associated with that project. And generally a lot of people might have access to that, or at least a couple of organisers will have access to that. And so you need to think about how to manage that. So it's not that there's necessarily one right answer, but it is really important to have discussions between your team members who will have access to this inbox and agree on a strategy. In terms of organisation, particularly if you're going to get a lot of emails through, you can have folders or tags for emails depending on what client you use. And it's probably wise to, again, agree on that. So, you know, we're tagging all events under events, we're going to have subfolders or subtags, just to make sure, similarly like with an organizational system for files, that everybody's on the same page. It can also be really useful to have a folder or a tag set up for each team member. So if, you know, people work on different days or things come in specifically for one person to action via a shared mailbox, that can be moved into their section. And then if you log in, it's really easy to see, oh, these are all the things I now need to go and deal with. And above all, the biggest piece of advice we can give is don't misuse reading emails. So if you read an email, either you need to action it and actually do what the email requires, or mark it back as unread, because otherwise your teammates will assume that it's already been dealt with and things will slip through the cracks.
So in step 8, we talk about file management. So it's important that you agree on a way of tracking changes within your document or dealing with version control. So for networks and projects, you're going to be working on a lot of documents, data and presentations, which is kind of what we're going to focus on. If you do work with code, you might want to use Git for version control. So we're not going to cover this due to the time that we have, but I will be posting a link into the chat. You can check out the videos that we previously made about using Git and GitHub for version control as part of our Skills for Scientists series. So an easy method for tracking the other types of documents is to turn on the inbuilt track changes feature, which is in most document processing suites. And then you can be able to see who has edited what. This is a really good way of enabling you to all sort of within a team work on the same document and see what has been changed. Instead of the situation that can arise where several people edit an offline document, email it around, and then you end up with several different versions, which just confuses everybody. You can also manually make new versions when you reach a big change or a submission, such as a paper version 1, and then with corrections, paper version 2. But again, this should be discussed and agreed upon so you know when you've moved to a new version. You can also include a version table within your document to show what's been changed between versions. But do make sure that you still are uploading everything to that place where you've decided to store all of your files, and make sure you use sensible file names. So there's no point making the effort to centralize your files and have a system to work around it if you end up with a file naming system such as the one on this slide where nobody knows what's going on. So forms is another really useful aspect to use in your organisation if you need to collect a lot of data from different people about the same type of thing. So the examples on this slide are forms for our AI3SD conference abstract submissions and also for our funding reviews. Although we have so many forms, I couldn't fit them all on the slide, but we use them for all kinds of things. So applications themselves, to collect feedback about meetings, to run surveys, to collect registration information. And using Microsoft Forms specifically, if you've got a team site set up, is really great because you can then collaboratively set them up with your teammates. You can all work on them together. You can change their privacy, so you can keep them within your organisation to start with and then open them up when you actually want people to fill them in. And then very conveniently, you can open all of the results in one easy to use spreadsheet. So we really highly advise using forms to collect these types of common information rather than just trying to get everybody to send things in via a Word document and then spend time collating it later. Cool. So our final thing is about capturing meeting records. So we often take notes in certain meetings, with formal meetings often being minuted, but other discussions might be lost. So since we started running meetings online, we've realized the power of recording meetings. So you can often do this through Teams or Zoom, utilizing either the automated captioning or the transcription functions of Microsoft Streams, to actually record your discussion and pull it out into text form that can easily be converted like into notes to capture your meeting. So this means that if you have one of those really super useful meetings where you said something really excellent and then 2 minutes later completely forgot what it was, you can actually capture a lot of that stuff. It's also really useful for meetings that need to be potentially formally minuted, or where you're trying to take part in the discussion and also take notes at the same time, because it allows you to capture more of the discussion or frees you up to actually take part in more of the discussion as needed.
So there you have it, our 10 steps to nailing your organisation. And yes, that picture is a personal nailed it edition of my own from my younger, less experienced baking days. So we really hope that was useful. And just to finish, we'd like to draw your attention to 3 relevant series of material if you found this talk useful. So there is, of course, the rest of the Failed It to Nailed It series, of which this is a new instalment. And we've run lots of previous sessions on many different aspects of dealing with data management, publishing, ethics, etc. So if you do need any further resources for that, there's lots of useful stuff there. There's also our Skills for Scientists series that we ran last summer, which also has talks available on data management and specifically collaborative data management and collaborative working. And finally, there's our Network of Network resource, which was worked on by a set of network coordinators who are part of a lot of different network groups. And all of the lovely faces you can see on the slide are the people who've contributed to one or more of these resources, and you will see some of those popping up later. And yeah, thanks for listening, and we're happy to take questions.